I looked up the Merriam-Webster dictionary. What is caste? Seems like a logical place to start. One of the hereditary social classes of Hinduism that restrict the occupation of the members and their association with the members of other castes. Okay? Vaishyas and Shudras, two of the four castes we'll be talking about today, are Varnas. Called castes. A traditional definition like this. They intermingle on a daily basis in India. So then is this definition really valid? Doesn't seem like it. Perfectly valid question. And it refutes the definition that we're giving. Ah, sorry. Can you guys not hear me back there?
I heard my question.
Oh, okay. So the question was, if that's the definition of caste, how does it make sense given our daily experience violates that definition? Yep.
Probably because the Merriam-Webster dictionary isn't a good definition of caste.
You could ask that, but then you can pick your other dictionary, and they all reflect the same definition.
I wouldn't really trust the Western dictionary to explain the Eastern concept.
Okay?
Yeah, it's a Western view of the East.
Okay.
This was probably true like a few hundred years back. That's what the definition is like.
Okay.
It just depends how you define association. There's like formal association and there's more personal association. I think this is pretty legitimate to talk about like marriage or socializing.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? So the problem is the dictionary is wrong. And the way they tell a definition is wrong, all you need is a counterexample. Right? And yes, there are nuances we can debate, but the dictionary doesn't clarify the word association. We can flip open to the page on association, and that will not help. So there's a four-part definition. My favorite is the fourth. But the second part, a division of society based on the differences of wealth, inherited rank, privilege, profession, occupation, or race. Does that segregation happen here? Who here lives in a caste system in the U.S.? Beyond the definition that's here. But in common parlance, none of us do. We believe that the caste system is an illusion. Okay, this is confusing. Third definition, a system of rigid social stratification, characterized by hereditary status, endogamy, I can't say that word, and social barriers sanctioned by custom, law, or religion. If you don't know what the word endogamy means, and I didn't, so I looked it up, it means marriage within the group. So the problem here, and three examples, Shivaji, if any of you followed India in the last couple hundred years in history, K.R. Narayanan, who was the 10th president of India, and Natharam, who's a random rich person, who's a CEO of a major company in India. The three of them have something in common, kind of. They're from the bottom rungs of society in a traditional hierarchy of caste. Shivaji was a Shudra. K.R. Narayanan was a Dalit. And Natharam, I believe, was also a Dalit. Okay, so well, if we have social stratification, there's no way this should be possible. Okay.
Well, it didn't say foolproof, it just said rigid, which implies that most of the time, or like 90% of the time, you don't break out of that system of social stratification.
So
I wouldn't accept that as
we can keep going down the list. This is not the full list.
Sure, but if you count by the percentage of all Indian people, 1.2 billion or 1.5 billion, is it
Across
really,
all of history.
Sure,
Yeah.
probably not that much more, 1.8,
Yeah.
2 billion.
And what we find is it wasn't rigid. There's tons and tons of mobility. We have to define a lot of terms, but
No, but caste, if you can break the caste system, that doesn't mean the definition of caste is wrong. That just means you broke the system.
the problem is the two interleave. Definition comes about by observing what reality is.
Yeah, so the reality of caste started how many thousands of years ago?
The reality of caste started within the last 100 years when the term was coined.
If there was no term, that doesn't mean caste didn't exist. They coined the term because of what the history was for the last.
So let's get into that. That's a really good point, and we'll talk about it.
So to put it another way, there's an intended system and what actually ended up happening.
Okay. Last one's my favorite. A specialized form of a worker, ant, or bee, a polymorphic social insect that carries out a particular function of the colony. Okay, that's my favorite one. Insects? Caste? Okay, anyway. Caste is a term that was created by someone who got fairly confused when they looked at India and the confusing social structure that was there. They blended several different things. Now used a word with a stick. Or the word is used as a stick to people. But unfortunately, it's also a common term that's used to refer to the amalgamation of two distinctly different concepts, Varna and Jati. And that goes to your point, and to your point in the back. They're trying to describe something that they saw, that with their limited capabilities, they could make sense of to better rule India. The term itself that has a Portuguese origin was used by the British through lots of censuses and other things to figure out, okay, how the hell do we rule the society? Because the last 500 years, 800 years when Islam was here, they couldn't. There was continuous warfare during the Islamic period in India. There was never a long period of peace where Islam ruled India. Didn't happen. They wanted something that was longer lasting where they could actually rule India. They figured when Islam came, it killed all the Shafi'is, all the warriors, others stepped in their place. They never could win over society, so they're like, all right, screw it. Establish tax called jizya. We'll get the money, we'll extract it. It's like extracting oil from the ground, and we'll live with it. British wanted something longer lasting. To do that, they needed to understand our society, so they could then break it into something that they could rule. Caste was an outcome of that study. It was an attempt to understand what was wrong for many reasons. Two of them was the confusion of two distinctly different concepts. So, pulled a picture out of biology. Who here has ever seen a chart like this? 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade biology. Right? So, oh, sorry, you're not supposed to see that. So, if I'm a gorilla, why the hell can't I be a human? Would you laugh at me as a gorilla?
No, because you probably wouldn't understand. Also, you're a gorilla, so you'd probably be dead if you did that to a gorilla.
So this is the perspective we get when people look at our system, and we'll talk about this also. We have categorization that's created, that's top-down, that says, hey, let's look at all of these different types of animals. Let's trace down and create an organizational system so we can make sense of it. But the question, can a gorilla ask to be a human? Why don't I have social mobility as a gorilla to become a human is irrelevant to this conversation. We can reclassify a gorilla to be a human, but a gorilla has no social mobility on this chart because that mobility doesn't make sense.
But isn't this a biological chart, so you'd be saying biological?
Hmm? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But the concept, the question is stupid.
Oh,
That's
okay.
where you're getting at.
I didn't understand.
That's right.
Where you're going. I didn't
Yeah,
understand.
the question is stupid because it doesn't make sense. Right? Sorry, there's a comment or question?
Yeah, I guess I'm not fully understanding the point that you're trying to make. Because social mobility is different from like actual physical biological differences, right?
But so there's limitations to any analogy that I will make, and I'll make lots and lots of them. So play along to some extent. All of these have points where they break. And getting to the reality of biology breaks it. But regardless of the biology, a gorilla has no ability to affect change on this chart because of a desire that a gorilla has to be someone else, to be a different thing on this list. Right? It's a top-down view. The gorilla doesn't participate in it. He doesn't get to pick where he sits on this chart. And the chart itself doesn't impact the life of a gorilla. Right? How does it matter to a gorilla what happens? Okay, second question. Is discrimination bad?
Yes.
Okay, why?
I'm going to let you answer.
Is discrimination bad?
No.
No, it depends on the context.
Okay.
Like if you discriminate between a good worker and a poor worker, like if you have a job, like you want to, if you want to employ someone, and if you have like two options, like a good worker and a bad worker, you obviously discriminate like choose a good worker. Why do you waste your resources and future the bad worker?
Okay.
So discrimination is good in some context, but
that help? No.
Discrimination, like somehow means some people feel superior for
Okay.
no reason. Like you might have the same kind of sources, but because you are like discriminated like a particular people, you feel superior and you make other people feel inferior.
Okay.
I think discrimination is bad.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Inherently, it's not bad because every time you're making a choice, you're discriminating. So in the sense that people are saying it's bad, it's because people are they're making a choice that isn't necessarily nice or morally right.
Okay.
Depends on what the goals are. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. More comment?
I think the better question to ask here is discrimination on what parameter is fair? Like this is the complete question. This is an incomplete question. The complete question will be discrimination on what parameter is bad or good.
So if my questions are incomplete, that's intentional. So a little bit of my background. Studied computer science, worked in product strategy, run Hindupedia on the side. Would any of you trust me to be your doctor? I would hope to God you discriminate against me if you have bad health. Right? And it goes to your point. And to your point, the parameters are important. So when we talk in blanket terms, this system is bad because it discriminates. Is that a valid comment? And the answer, as both of you gave it, is no, because we're missing the parameters. Another question. We're running out of these questions, but just wanted to just open up your eyes a little bit. How comfortable would you be in it? So any mathematicians in the room for ask a question. You can't answer the question. And you can't answer the question. I was hoping for something that was obscure enough that most of you would not relate to it. How comfortable would you, with the rest of you non-mathematicians, be in a conference on graph theory? You can't answer the question. Right? Why is that? Someone raise your hand. Otherwise I'll point to someone.
Probably because you don't know that.
You don't understand what the topic is. You don't understand what everything is.
You don't have a framework.
There we go. Yep. Yep. I think that illustrates the point.
Yeah.
So you don't have a framework on how to fit in. You don't understand the language. You don't understand the customs in that conference. When people talk, yeah, some semblance of English, but the terms are so technical, you're like, I don't know what it is. And what we learn when we put ourselves in positions like this is transcending that social alienation that occurs naturally is really, really hard. And we're just talking about one technical subject. Right? We're not talking about the people, the culture, the concepts, the traditions, and all of the other things that go with social structure. Just taking one vocation that is alien for most of us in the room, saying step into it, it's hard to have a conversation in that setting. That's natural. Okay. If you guys haven't had enough of these rhetorical questions, we're going to be talking about social structure. We had an exercise on social structure. And it is a technical topic, although, like many topics, we like to have opinions on everything. We need to understand that social structure is about two things. So behavior that's emergent, that means it happens naturally. And it's about behavior that's determinate. So it happens as a reaction to something else. Okay? We need to talk about social mobility and what that means. We just had an exercise that tried to depict that. It's the movement of individuals, families, and households, and other categories of people between social strata in a society. That means we also need to define what we mean by social strata. So the first part is from Wikipedia. Second part in green is what I added, because the society we live in, the primary strata we evaluate and measure against is wealth and income. Those two are distinct concepts. Those are the things. What's low class, lower class, upper class, middle class, middle upper caste, middle lower class. It's socioeconomic and nothing else. And it's not even socioeconomic, it's more economic than socio. Right? And so we have these broad terms that encompass a lot of things, but we measure a very limited set. And that's a set we consider as the thing we value the most. That's why we figured out a way to measure it. So continuing down a sociology class, the generic full definition says there are three terms, or three capital types enable social mobility. Economic capital, social capital, cultural capital. And if you read through the slide, they're related to each other. And you can have the slides. Okay. Economic capital is easy. How much money do I have in my pocket? How much is coming in, right? Wealth and income. Social capital is harder to measure. What's my group like that I communicate in, right? Based on friends, based on professional networks, based on community, based on the color of your skin, based on religion. Right? There's a long list. Third one is cultural capital, and this is the biggest of the three. Right? It's what's the skills I have or the knowledge I have. Someone talked about they had lacked skills to build a house. Right? So that's a form of cultural capital, the general sense of knowledge that we have. And the general rule of thumb is if you want to move to a different socio-strata, not a wealth income bracket, but the broader term, you need to have sufficient amount of all three. If we go 100 years ago into the UK, you have the noblemen and you have the commoners. It doesn't matter how much money a commoner has, they can never be a nobleman until they get knighted or whatever. Right? Until the noblemen accept them, they can't cross that barrier, and it's not an economic barrier. Right? It's a cultural barrier and a social barrier. But when we talk about social mobility in the broadest sense, we need to understand this. Okay, Western society, the world we live in, general terms again, there will be plenty of exceptions to this, but the general macro goal is we need to allocate scarce resources. The key word there, resources are scarce. Our individual goals, we want to satisfy our unlimited wants and desires. The key word there, unlimited. And how do we do it? We fight amongst ourselves to do it. Right? Not fisticuff fights or shooting fights, although those both happen, but in the everyday workplace, how do I get better than the next guy? There's only so much money around for the annual compensation thing. How do I get more of it? Have career conversations with my boss. How do I move to the next level, get promoted? Or in my personal life, started as a computer scientist writing software. Like, well, this sucks. I can be a technical guy, and I'll never make as much money as Jeff Bezos. I was at Amazon at the time. Let's go to business school. Let's change my profession. Because look, the product managers make more money than the engineers. Right? When we're picking professions or going into college, do I want to be an engineer or a doctor? Well, why don't you want to be the artist or the school teacher? Your parents will tell you, well, they make no money. Why do you want to be that? It'll never amount to anything. Right? Generalizations, and I know there are exceptions in the room, but general things. And the result, the first one, was in the news a lot last year, I think, the 99% versus the 1%. Second one, we're always fighting for success. We're always looking at who's catching up. Third one, as you grow more senior in your professions, as you gain more wealth, it becomes harder and harder to be a part of a community. You feel isolated. And this is consistent feedback. You look across biologies and books of all the wealthy and rich people and their histories. Consistent feedback. They feel isolated. Last one, if we need to allocate scarce resources, and we're going to do the best damn job we can about economic resources, we ignore the others. What's happening to the planet today as a result of that? And we're only starting to wake up in our society today that there are resources beyond economic that matter. Vedic society was different. Their goals were different. Their desires were different. The macro goal is mulch for everyone. But you need to meet physical needs to make that a reality. And so that was a part of it. Individually, that meant how do I improve myself in order to meet that macro goal of mulch? If I'm using terms that are not clear, or confusing, or need to be defined, tell me. Yep.
What exactly is the interpretation of Vedic society?
Society based on the beliefs of the Vedas. So Hindu society in general. How we get there varies person to person based on where they're born, what their education level is, what their desires are. So the how is totally open-ended. What happened as a result? There's a self-imposed limitation on desires. Remember, we just talked about unlimited desires in today's society, which we live in. Here, there's a self-imposed limitation, right? there, it was maximizing the use of scarce resources. Here, it's optimized use of available resources. This is a little nuanced, but the concept of scarcity isn't there. If the desires are limited, then the resources aren't going to fall short. The group in the back experienced that there weren't enough cards to go around because everyone wanted to do something. The group in the middle didn't have that problem. Who are we competing against? I don't need to look over my shoulder. I need to do better than what I'm doing. Right? This focus is on myself. As a result, there are a ton more social groups, but there's less isolation, both within the groups and across the groups. And that's because the groups are created at different dimensions. I'm a Bhakta Vishnu versus Shiva. It's definition of two groups. I'm a Maheshwari versus Agraval. That's a different group. Now, what's the relationship between the two axes? There's none. Maheshwaris worship Shiva and Vishnu. Agravals worship Shiva and Vishnu. They're orthogonal groups, and we have so many dimensions of those, which allows for more social cohesion. And the value of the connections is that they help me get to my ultimate goal of moksha. Through the interchanges we have, through the value we give and help to each other, through the way we let go of stress, it helps me get beyond my daily problems, get beyond my daily sustenance to try to achieve something higher. So, we finally get to why are we here? Yep.
Sorry, I didn't give the slide. I don't want to jump the gun here, but so that was intended. Was that actually observed in practice?
We'll get to it. And if we don't, then ask me. Question? So what is Varna? So I'll bring up this chart here. Varna is a statement of how society is arranged. It's a biology chart for human social structure. What's the mobility across the Varna is a totally irrelevant question. Like the question of a gorilla saying, why can't I be a human? Irrelevant. It's a top-down view that says, when I look at society, it has a certain composition. Let me document it. Let me document its practices. Let me document its behaviors. And let me create a document. So what are they? The Brahmana. You'll have fun with some of the pictures, hopefully. The top left and the top middle are the ones we're familiar with. Those are the stereotypes. The guy who does our headlines, the pundit, the priest, the guy who documented stuff in history. Chanakya with Chanakya, right? Arthashastra. It's a classic definition of a Brahmin. Did you know a school teacher is also a Brahmin? What about the computer scientist? The professor? The psychologist? The doctor? They're all Brahmins. Because they're the people whose purpose is to learn, share, and preserve knowledge. So a couple of terms we're going to use that consistently to compare across the groups are in the middle with mobility. We talked about economic mobility, social mobility, and cultural mobility. The economic mobility and the economic power of the Brahmins historically to date has always been low. And the reason of that is because of the expectation of their lifestyle is equally that it will be low. If you see a rich Brahmin in a big palace, you're like, that guy's not a true Brahmin. Because he's hoarding knowledge and using that to create power and wealth. By definition, a Brahmin is not allowed to have money. By tradition, he has to go beg on a daily basis for alms for food to feed himself and his family. The social and cultural mobility is high. Why is this? When I have to come and say, Bhiksham Devi, give me food for my family, you could give me food, you could not. Now, if we start chatting and find out you're having problems with your husband, your kids don't listen to you, and your grandmother is ill, then I will use my knowledge and give it freely to help you. So I do this with every person in this room on a daily basis because that's how I get my sustenance. It's not an exchange of value because some days you might not have problems. You're like, here you go, and I'll be like, thanks, see you, and that's okay too. But there's a daily exchange of value. And so they act as the psychologists. They act as the doctors. They're freely exchanging these things. And they have a tremendous network. That's a social capital as a result. If, as a Brahmin, I come to you every day asking for bhiksha, and for a week I disappear, you're going to start thinking, what happened to Krishna? He start poking around and talk to your friends who you know also met Krishna Maheshwari. Strength of that capital. Cultural capital is by their background. They're the guys who have knowledge, so by definition, they have a lot of it. We talked about lifestyle in terms of expectations. There's a lot of expectations on social service. A doctor is expected to heal the sick. A teacher is expected to teach the young. Right, so that there is an expectation there of the Brahmins. Knowledge, we talked about power. So we need to be a little bit careful here, because power is defined a lot of different ways. Economic power, low. Military strength, low, because they don't know how to fight. They're never trained. We can talk about other types of power, like knowledge power, called it knowledge, so we can't. But that's where they're high. The other types of power we typically associate are low. And purity. This is a distinctly Hindu concept. It comes from the Vedas. And there's high expectations of purity. And I'm going to not talk about it a lot, but let's say at the basic level, is the guy who's clean, or does he smell nasty? Yeah, I'm expecting him to bathe at least twice a day. It's India, it's hot, it's muggy. He's going to be clean and pleasant to look at. Then there are other concepts of purity in terms of, is he doing his daily puja, daily bhavans, and X and Y and Z and A and B and C? And there's an expectation of that, of Brahmins. Kshatriyas. Expect the guy on the left, the big war with the sword, he's the king, he's the army guy. It's also the police officer. It's also the government bureaucrat, the guy who accepts our taxes and audits us. That they're all Kshatriyas. In general, their economic capital is high by virtue of their position. Their social capital and their cultural capital is equal. What's the strength of their network? If they're the rulers and administrators, and if they're seen as being too friendly with everyone else, well then the impartiality comes into question. So by definition, they cannot be high, because then they're seen as violating the rules of their role. Expectations of lifestyle vary by role. So if he's a king and he lives like a pauper, well, he's a useless king. If he's a police guy and he lives like a king, well, he's certainly taking bribes. How can he afford that? Right? So the expectations of lifestyle varies by role. Their social service is high. They're willing to give up their life for us. Their knowledge is so-so. They know how to fight, but they don't know how to cook or clean or teach us ABC. Their power is high. Again, they hold the sword. And their purity, mediocre. The Vaishya. All of us collectively belong in this Varna. We're the money guys. We're all about money. About generating wealth. Business, trade, whatever. Economic might, the max. Social might, pretty high, because to make that money, we gotta connect, we gotta network amongst each other, amongst our customers, amongst our partners. Cultural, limited education required to go and sell stuff. Lifestyle, there are no expectations. If you're a Vaishya and you're not good at it, you're gonna have a terrible lifestyle and be a pauper. If you're good, you're gonna be like the Ambanis with a $3 billion house. Social service, there are some expectations. When a Brahmin comes and says, Bhiksham Devi, there's an expectation you give donations. Clearly there's an expectation. Expectation of knowledge? Expectation of power? Your power comes from your money. So there's no direct correlation. And the purity expectations, a little bit on the high, not nearly to the level of the Brahmin. Actually, that arrow is wrong. Should be roughly the same as the Kshatriya. Yeah, you bathe, you clean, but you don't have to do all the rituals that a Brahmin is supposed to do. Shudra. This category of people are expected to provide functions and services to society. They include the vast majority of occupations and the vast majority of the population. So personally, being born as a Vaishya, after graduating with my undergrad, I performed the services of a Shudra. I was a computer engineer at Amazon, clicking away at my keyboard. I was the modern day bricklayer of the software industry. Right? farmer, the construction guy, 90% of the people you meet around you, they all fall in this category. Their economic might isn't high. Their social capital is medium because they have their own networks. Their cultural capital is relatively low because most of them are not in highly skilled occupations. Expectations on lifestyle don't exist. If you're particularly successful, great, go live like the Ambanis. And if you're not, then you're going to be a pauper or somewhere in the middle. Expectations of social services equally don't exist. If I'm going to a house of a Shudra as a Brahmin asking for something, if they can afford it and they give it, great. If they don't, so be it, I'll move on to the next house. I don't have an expectation like I do in Vaishya, where I expect that I will get something. As a Brahmin, I still have to provide my service because this is not an exchange. Knowledge and power, not that strong, but this is the vast majority of the population. So if the population gets together, there is strength in numbers. And there is no expectation of purity. If you bathe, great. If you don't and you smell because you live in a pig farm, then so be it. It depends totally on where you are and where your place in life is. So be it. Anyone feel one is better or worse than the other at this point?
Yeah.
But, so first and then second. Why?
Because we live in a society where we want money, so I would rather have more money than less money.
Okay. And then there's a comment here.
You obviously want to pick the one with a lot of green arrows.
So I'm going to quickly flip through. Which one has the most green arrows? This one has the most green arrows, I think, but it also has the most red arrows and has the least amount of money. By definition, they have the least amount of money.
I said 99.
So definitely not the one with the most green arrows.
Yeah, I would think that based on that definition, that would be highest. It doesn't have money, so yes, it doesn't meet that criteria, so it's not high yet. Otherwise, it is still the highest.
But they don't need money.
Yeah, they still have a lot of influence. They still are well regarded, well respected by everyone. And that's obviously
So right now, what we're hearing is the structure we're defining puts the person with the least amount of money, the least amount of economic capital in the highest factor, which is at odds with the society needs it today. And that is exactly how Vedic society treated the Brahmins. Exactly how. But I wish we could conclude with these four. There are two categories of people that don't fit. The sannyasis. By definition, they are outside of Vedic society. They declare themselves to be dead to society the day they take their sannyas diksha, their sannyasa initiation. They renounce their name, they renounce their family, they renounce their Varna, they renounce their Jati. They're above and beyond. And it's not that they achieve enlightenment the day they're initiated. They're starting the journey. A couple of examples. Swami Adeshanaji, Swami Dhananji, who are on the advisory board of Hindupedia, and two random devotees others that I found on the internet. And the reason I picked this set of four is to illustrate a couple of things. Economic, social, cultural, their capital is low by definition because they've given up on what society can provide them. If you see a sannyasi driving in 30 limousines, we make fun of them. And yes, that sannyasi existed. His name was Osho. And we did make fun of him. And we still do. Social and cultural, well, if they're renounced society, how can they have so many ties into society? By definition, cannot happen. Their lifestyle is expected to be relatively low. Again, if they're like Osho with their lifestyle, we're gonna make fun of them because we don't believe that they're being true to their vows. Their social services is limited. And this is at odds between the first two and the last two on the above and the below pictures. When you look at Dayananji and Adeshananji, you expect them to interact with society, but again, that was by choice. The Gauris on the bottom, and there's a lot of sannyasis that follow not the Gauda path, but other paths. They're ascetics. They live in the Himalayas, or they live in the crematoriums, or they live in places where they don't have to interact. There's no requirement of them to interact either. And even Adeshananji and Dayananji, they had their period of isolation as well. I know Adeshananji was 10 or 12 years or 15 years in the Himalayas on So there's really limited expectations of them. But the expectations on knowledge are through the roof. When you meet a Babaji, you touch it on the street, you touch his feet, and you're going to ask him random question that comes to your mind, and you hope that they have an answer. In fact, you expect them to have an answer, because their expectation on grasp of knowledge in the broadest sense is highest. And their power is high, but it's not the power we've been talking about so far. They can't pull a gun on you. They can't tell you you pay too little on your taxes. They have no money directly. But they have power through their tapasya, through their asceticism itself. So they can give you a shop and deem you to the 9 hells or whatever, right? So they do have power, and there's plenty of documentation of that. But they're outside of Vedic society, and the choice to interact or not is totally theirs. There's no expectation. And then there's one more group, and they're the protected tribes. And I've given 2 very distinctly different examples. The first group are literally the backward tribes that live in random places. And then the second example is Jews, who were one of the first tribes out of Israel. They landed in India because that was the first place they found where they weren't being persecuted. They have their own social structure, their own community, their own expectations, and their own mobility structures. But they're off to the side on Vedic society, and in some sense they're protected. How many of you have heard of some of the isolated tribes in the Amazonian forest? No, just heard of them. Yes? Do you know what the rules are to interact with them today?
Not allowed
to go and meet with them?
You're not allowed to.
I'm not allowed to.
They're literally protected by the government.
They're untouchables.
I mean, by definition, they are untouchable, but
Exactly.
not in the sense that they are untouchable.
They're untouchable.
Well,
Yes.
there's a difference, right? It's not that they're not allowed to come up. So in some ways, you're untouchable.
Yes. But given where they are, given their level of technology, what's the likelihood that they could ever reach out and touch them?
I think it was low for the, but choice is what matters, right?
The untouchability is something that's prescribed by the majority society. Saying don't go and touch them. They're untouchable. Right?
Yeah, but we're not preventing them from.
You're not preventing them knowing full well that it's pretty damned impossible for them to reach out and touch you.
No, I mean, it's fully possible for some of these societies to reach out. But what we're doing is we're saying it's illegal to introduce our
Way of life.
arguably advanced technologies into their society.
Our advanced technology, our way of life, our beliefs, our social structures, our education system.
There's a byproduct. I think the real reason is you don't want to introduce our technology.
It's all of the above. Because we're afraid of losing the technology and their belief systems and their ways of life and their richness by polluting them with ours. And that's really how we did it. And they're the better off among the untouchables. The American Indians, they didn't fare so well when they gained their untouchability status. We said, we want your land. Oh, you don't believe in land ownership? Great! Here's a blanket full of malaria. Oh, you've never had malaria? Even better, have some more. Right? So killed off a majority of them, then sent them to the reservations, which are not ruled by local law and only by federal law. So the local policeman can't go after someone in one of these reservations. They're the modern untouchables in the US. Again, if they come out and touch me, so be it. And I can touch them right back if they're face to face, within touching distance. But I can't go into their reservation.
I mean, you can. You can walk
Without
up.
invitation. And many choose to invite by setting up the casinos, yes. But it is their protected land. Right? So we're reaching the edge of our analogy here. But we had a concept in Vedic society of we need to protect certain people, just like the tribes and peoples we're talking about. And that's the origin of untouchability. Oh, sorry, one more thing. But there was also a recognition that because the majority society deems a group untouchable, doesn't mean the untouchables don't have their own society. So, do Varna descriptions impact daily life? Remember, we started with the taxonomy. We said 4 categories within and 2 without. But they're top-down descriptions. They're academic in nature, and they're classifications. Just like a gorilla's behavior can't change his classification by his desire, similarly, the concept of can I change Varnas is an irrelevant question because it's a top-down depiction. But they do. Picture my kids, because I can't avoid not putting them there. But when they ask me the question of what's the difference between Dad, what's the difference between a man and a gorilla, I'm going to go explain it to them. And that is going to change their emergent behavior. How they depict is based on their expectations of how things are classified. Or I will yell at them when they're being particularly rowdy, stop being like a monkey. We have those discussions at home, and it's natural, and it impacts their emergent behavior. So yes, the classification is the classification, we can't change it, but it does influence our behavior. It's not totally without, like it is in the gorilla versus the human case in the discussion, right? So any questions so far? Where does it come from? Chatur Varnam Maya Shrishtam Guna Karma Vibhagasha. Comes from God. Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Talks about the fourfold grouping of people, division based on duties, karma, and qualities. Was created by me. Okay, so God created the top-down classification system, is what he's telling us in the Bhagavad Gita. What does, yep?
Question. The way that you described the four Varnas, I didn't see you mention inheriting that or the hereditary nature of it. Was that assumed or intentionally not included in the definition?
I'll come back to that one for clarity. So Varna is a universal law that describes human dispensation, the way our minds work, and the qualities we have within us. It's also like gravity. You don't have to believe in it. You don't have to agree with the labels. It just is. And we don't live in a perfect society. Those are the description versus implementation. But Varnas are what they are, and they apply to all of us. Whether we choose to associate, be born with, or change the label, doesn't impact the Varna. It impacts our understanding and our relationship to it. It impacts our emergent behavior. Last part of the definition, off the head of the top. What is Jati? Jati is the emergent part of the description. Varna is the determinant part. It's an emergent organizational principle for society. What we modeled were 3 different social principles in the exercise, and one of them was based on Jati. It's a social grouping. We all collectively belong to a specific Jati, or to a small handful of Jatis. I'm not sure everyone in the room. Anyone belong to the Maheshwari group? We're all one Jati. Any Agrawals here? You're a different Jati on your own. And there are others here that belong to yet different groups, right? Generally, and this is definition, not emergent where we are today, started with a common location. Across the room, I'm willing to bet all the Maheshwaris in the room have different locations, so we violated that in reality. But in definition, we didn't. We started in the same place. We started as Vaishyas, traders, businessmen. That's where the origins of Maheshwaris come from. We have common traditions and celebrations. We celebrate Eid, we celebrate Holi, Gangor, which I learned about a couple of years ago after I got married. But when you go in a Maheshwari community and celebrate Gangor, suddenly everyone knows. I'm like, what is this? I have no idea. And Nanu, my wife, is like, yeah, I know what this is. We celebrate it at home. Coming from India, 8,000 miles, she could fit in. Where else does this happen in the world? And not just fit in at a vocation level, but fit in culturally because of the common traditions that are held sacred. They're common cultural values. Who's heard of the term Maheshwaris or Kanjus? Madhvaris or Kanjus? Right? Common cultural value. Good or bad, different story, but a common value nonetheless. Preferences for marriage. in general, we tend to marry within ourselves. About a decade ago, it would have been unheard of, or maybe heard of, but rarely for Maheshwari to marry another one. Different jatis. Today, that level of distinction is going away, but a Maheshwari marrying a South African black person from Nigeria is still pretty uncommon. Nothing against those people. There is a preference for marriage, and it's a preference, it's not a rule. Interesting, as we go even today in India, there is a specific judiciary and specific laws that govern jati beyond the laws that govern the land. So there's the constitution, there's the laws passed by parliament, then there's jati laws. And all three are relevant in everyday society. And if you violate a jati law, you go to a jati court. If you violate a legal law, or state or nation law, then you go to the appropriate courts. They have their own ways of dispensing punishment, their own ways of fines, their own ways of evaluating whether that was violated or not in the first place. They had common and sometimes even specific temples and places of worship. Wait a second. Where's the last Maheshwari temple we went to? I can't remember one. So there's one. So true Maheshwari, if I've ever seen one. But if you go to some other places, that definitely is. And historically, that was more important, to have a community and a temple that was common to that community. And the reason for it, that temple wasn't just about worship. Where were all the marriages held for a jati? In their jati temple. Who were the priests and the pandits? They were from within the jati. If I want a birthday party, where do I go to rent a hall? The temple. Where we hang out. If I want to go study in a group, do I need to find a room in my one-room chopri that's called a school? No. I go to my temple. It's a place to hang out. If I want to go shopping, where do I go? The stores are right outside the temple. Right? You're getting the gist of it. The temple is a social center piece. And so it's important for a community to have their own. And that's what happened. And even today, there are places where that's still true. Over time, a jati can change. And there are places in deep parts of history where that did happen. Where all the Kshatriyas were killed because of the Islamic invasions, and the Shudra jati or Vaishya jati said, this is not tenable, we have no defense. Let's all take up learning, take up arms, and let's go fight. The entire jatis overnight transformed into Kshatriyas. So it happened at a community level. They can change their Varna by adopting levels of purity and restrictions and levels of knowledge and the way they do service. There has been events in history and evidences to say entire Varnas and communities changed the Varna that they belonged to. Wasn't quick, wasn't overnight, but did happen. They can become extinct. Remember, these started as vocational groupings. So do I need a swordsman anymore? That jati doesn't exist. Right? And yet, there are new jatis that have come about. It wouldn't surprise if there are jatis in India of computer scientists. Could happen. Or all of the folks that have the name that end in wala, you can tell clearly they're a vocational group that's become a jati. So it's fluid. One thing I want to talk about here is that it creates a sense of belonging too. And this is a double-edged sword. And we talked about the conference on graph theory and how hard it is to transcend social alienation. And that graph theory example is a vocation. Right? If I don't understand the subject matter, how can I communicate? And how can I feel a part of the group? Let's add a couple dimensions to it. Social, traditional. So I go to a group of mathematicians who celebrate graph theory and do puja to the goddess of graphs and celebrate their marriage around graphs or whatever. And they have their laws about specific types of graphs are allowed and not allowed to create. And they have their own temple of graph theory. Okay, as a non-mathematician entering that room, how do I join that group? It's really, really hard. But if I go into the group and say, how happy are you to be here, the sense of inclusion is really, really high. that into a practical example, 80% of the Christians in India, what jati do they belong to?
You don't.
Many of them belong into the Dalit jatis that they came from. 70, 80% of them. It's scary. Get a Brahmin Christian to enter a Dalit church is impossible. Either he will not go or they will kick him out. But they will not sit and pray to Jesus together. Will not happen. And there's enough evidence to support that statement that you can find. Social groups are social groups. They don't change and merge because of religion. There are too many distinct things that are tying them together. If you look at Islam across the world and across all the conquest that has happened, name one country, or name two countries that has retained their original heritage and culture in that article. One is easy because that's India. Name the second.
Persia.
Hmm?
Persia.
Where's Zoroaster? Zoroastrianism, I can't even say it. Zoroastrians. Where are they? They're like this 20,000 person community that's left, if even.
But they still have Zoroastrian customs in their society.
Hmm?
Like they celebrate Persian New Year. So
Yeah.
it's not like it's totally Islam style.
Yeah, so they retain something
Yeah.
to the extent that Islam allowed it, but most of it is gone. Right? Any other examples? That's a new one. I didn't know
Some
about
of the
that one.
problems with, or some of the problems what's happening in Pakistan, right? Because they try to bond or like join people based on religion, but if you look at it right now, the Shias cannot join the Sunnis and the Ahmadiyas and so.
But that's the emergent groupings within Islam. But the
Yeah.
societies that pre-exist are gone.
Exactly.
And across the Middle East, they're gone. Across Eastern Europe, they're gone where Islam dominates. In Western Europe, where Islam dominates, what was before is gone. Pre-Christianity, all the groups that were there are gone, save very small, few people that are trying to recreate what was there. India was always considered the incomplete conquest for Islam. Despite sitting in places of power for over 2,000 years, they weren't able to consolidate their rule, and they weren't able to convert the majority of the society. Because there was, religion is one aspect of social structure. We've got location, culture, bonding, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Much more than what I'm describing on the slide. Getting that confusion. Why can all of us come from different parts of this country into a room? Well, first, why did you even pay the exorbitant cost that Kavita asked of you to come here? Right? How many of you knew each other before coming here? Raise your hand. Relatively small number. About half of you. Not so small. About half. But the other half of you that you didn't know anyone, why did you show up? You had a sense of connection because you shared something in common that started out with the name of the event itself. And when you came here, how many of you felt like you were already included without knowing anyone here to some level? Right? It's because of all these things that are on this slide. It's the welcome you were talking about. But I also said it's a double-edged sword. If you're within it, you're within it. And if you're out, it's really hard to get in. Right? On the other hand, if it's really easy to get in, it's such a cultural mixing pot that the sense of belonging isn't there even. You lose that. How am I doing on time? Am I way over? Okay. I'm going to go, I have a couple more slides, I'm going to go fast. So the social goals, the middle group that was long gone Jati, their comment was, we all felt included. That's what Jati is about. It's about inclusion. Social mobility. There's individual mobility, group mobility. Group mobility is really high. Individual mobility, so-so. But again, Jati helps even individual mobility on the socioeconomic ladder, or the economic ladder. There's plenty of examples of that. Hotels in the U.S. are a great example. They act as a Jati in the U.S., and 98% of the motels in the U.S. are owned by them. Okay? Hierarchy. We talked about this. Should we? No, we didn't. The first three Varnas, not hierarchical. The fourth, sometimes. Others, sometimes. Interesting things. Varna and Jati, really confusing mixture. Brahmins, you have Brahmins that are cooks, which is typically a Varna occupation occupied by members of Shudra. It's a service. The other hand, you have Shudras with temples that are run by priests, or Shudras, which is a vocation that's a common vocation. If you look at upliftment, helping people raise their their economic profile, most of the help of the downtrodden Sudras is provided by the upper Varnas, the guys with the most green arrows, right? The Brahmins, the Vaishyas, and the Kshatriyas. Because the concept of hierarchy is alien to them in their daily life, or in your daily life. Do you Maheshwaris, feel any superior to the one Agarwal in the room? Or does the one Agarwal in the room feel superior to the Maheshwaris? It goes both ways, and the answer is no. The concept of hierarchy within our Jati, within the Vaishyas, is non-existent. But at the lower levels, or the lower levels, right, at the Shudras, the concept of hierarchy does sometimes exist between certain Jatis. Not all of them, it's not uniform. So it's confusing as hell to look at and try to understand it. This was the confusion that caused a lot of the caste discussion that we started with. And we don't live in a perfect world. Shivaji and Karna are two examples of many. Shivaji had to struggle to find a pandit who would declare him Kshatriya and a king. Because many of them said, you're born a Shudra, how can I coronate you? How can I do that ceremony for you? Arjun insulted Karna, despite having lessons from Lord Krishna himself. He's a Sudputra, he's a Sud, he's a charioteer, how can I fight him? That's beneath me. We also don't live in a perfect world in this society, on the right-hand side. The poor continue to stay poor and the rich continue to get richer. It's the top graph. The blacks, if you are black in this country, you have the highest likelihood of being in jail or being impoverished of any racial group. So we don't live in a perfect world here. We don't live in a perfect world in India. No society is perfect. So when someone points a finger and takes that stick to browbeat you with caste, turn it back to them and say, well, no society is perfect. Look at home first. Social mobility, the way we define it, has different goals than the goals of folks in India. That's the reason caste, Varna and Jati, still predominate despite all the changes. And the fact is, we have our problems, you have your problems, we'll fix yours, we'll fix ours.